Real quick, I said we weren't going to talk a lot of current WWE, but Drew McIntyre was making a big splash on the social media, everybody talking about what he said because he actually got to say the forbidden words over and over again until it sounded like he had some Tourette's, right?
I'm a wrestler on a wrestling show looking to wrestle. A wrestler on a wrestling show to wrestle.
I hate it when people steal my material. Think about this. It was on TV and in a meeting. Because on one of those Monday Night Raw Cornette's commentaries, when I was bemoaning the state of affairs of everything, WCW and WWF at that time, wasn't that my quote? That wrestling fans want to see wrestlers on a wrestling program wrestle?
That's right.
But it was even before, and the reason why I stuck that in at that particular time was because, oh golly, probably about 6 months beforehand, we had another one of those meetings that Vince would call, and it wasn't just Vince and the creative team, but it was Vince and me and Bruce and Shitstain and Jim Ross and Shane McMahon's in there, and I'm sure Kevin Dunn was in there, and several high-ranking studio executives, whatever, not Hollywood studio, but the WWF studio, from over on Hamilton Avenue. And they're going through the general stuff that we have to take notes on and everything. But Shane McMahon poses the question, well, besides superstars, what should we call our talent? Oh, sure. Entertainers came up, and superstars, and they're grasping for fucking words. I said, well, how about this? Since they're wrestlers wearing wrestling tights and wrestling boots, standing in a wrestling ring and talking about having a wrestling match in a company named the World Wrestling Federation, why can't we call them wrestlers? And I got the turd look, where everybody looked at me like I had turds hanging out of my mouth. And 25 years later, by cracky, they finally get it. No fan has ever said sports entertainment or sports entertainer or go to the sports entertainment show. And now they're finally catching up after all this time. It's like, why didn't somebody tell them before? But I mean, that's a positive step just in being able, in all seriousness, being able for the guys to do promos and sound more natural and not try to trip over all this convoluted verbiage and the things they're supposed to call everything. Instead of non-title match, it's a non-championship opportunity or whatever the fuck that, Vince was hung up on. You'd get a lot more emotion and genuine passion and or just feeling out of guys when they're not trying to trip over their tongue saying prepackaged, awkward, unwieldy, and not very descriptive terminology. So that's a positive. It's a small thing, but if the fans are already, remarking on it, then at least they're paying attention. But they've got a ways to go with the basic format of their program, and also just the fact that they have led people to believe that the matches are the least important part of the show for so long, it's going to take a while to turn that around. And when you go back and look at the old footage, you can see it's not about, well, it is about the wrestling looked different. The guys looked more like stars. The shit looked more violent, even though it wasn't as dangerous and it didn't have as many injuries. But the fans were going ape shit over shit that they sit on their hands for now because they've seen it a million times. And especially when they see people that don't really make a fuck in the overall scheme of things doing it constantly. So that's the thing to me that is exposing what the WWE's doing now is you watch the shit from 20 years ago and the people are going absolutely berserk. You can't watch AEW from 20 years ago because all of them were still wearing fucking diapers and there was no such thing. So they may look to the regular wrestling fan who's seen a lot of this shit, but at least their fans are more excited about what they're watching than the WWE fans are about what they're watching because they've seen shit that looks so much better in the past. What do you think, Brian?
You know, we've talked about just recently on the shows the fact that there are people tuning in to WWE TV net right now looking for little clues each and every episode as to the influence of Triple H. Dexter Lumis appearing on the show, different people who were let go being brought back, people you think of Triple H guys being brought back, and of course people are really hyper attentive to looking at the words being used or paying attention to the words being used, and that's why using the word wrestler, especially as many times as he did, as quickly as he did, is something that people notice because it sounds crazy, but is there any word that people knew Vince McMahon hated more than wrestling or wrestler? No. So, I mean, it's not a repudiation of Vince McMahon, but it's certainly interesting. Let me ask you your thoughts on this. If they go down a road where eventually, and a lot of people are going to have to be trained to use the word wrestler. Believe it or not, the people who had to be trained to talk the Vince-ese, the Vince language, are now going to have to be trained not to do that. But what about the idea that on a wrestling show they call them wrestlers, but still when they're doing, when Stephanie, when I say they, when a Stephanie or a Triple H are doing press, they still refer to it as sports entertainment. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, it's not like they're going to instantly go the opposite direction and put a ban out on the phrase sports entertainment because they've spent so long establishing that. They look kind of goofy. I think it's obviously great that the wrestlers can actually say we're wrestling or we're wrestlers, but they're probably still going to do sports entertainment for their publicity and their charity appearances or their mainstream functions or whatever. Maybe there'll be some crossover at some point to where people can get back to that. It was never a dirty word to the wrestling fans. And actually, when wrestling is hot, it's not a dirty word to the advertisers either. It's just when it's not hot, when it's not performing, and when it's bleh, then you give anybody that wants something to use against wrestling, you give them extra ammunition. But what about belt? There's a lot of these fucking clowns in the business now that think that the belts are actually supposed to be called titles and that's not another Vince-ism from his weirdness.
That's what I'm saying. People are going to have to
hand me that title. What? Get to Jesus Christ.
Yeah, people are going to have to be detrained because they've been talking the way to please Vince for such a long period of time. And it will be really interesting to see what else gets rolled out in terms of words they can use all of a sudden on TV. But wrestling and wrestler, who knew we'd see that on WWE TV nowadays?
Well, and we're not advocating for them to be able to say shit 17 times like they do on AEW where they sound so childish and they've already taken the fucking shock value off of it. But it'd be nice if they could use words that actually exist and describe things that they're actually talking about. Hospital, belt, wrestler, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see where that goes.
I mean, if they're gonna cut down on the scripted promos, if they are, you want to also cut down on forcing guys to use words that aren't natural. You want people to talk natural. That'd be the whole point of doing it less or letting guys cut loose a little more. So you want to free them up and not make them use words that make them sound like idiots.
Yeah, because a lot of these guys are not stunning public orators to begin with, and then they have to try to memorize some unwieldy turn of a phrase to not say something that everybody else would say because it's banned terminology. And then the next thing they need to do, obviously, is, tell the people instead of this is not and I guess some guys now, they actually want scripts, but this ain't a script. These are your points. This is the story you're telling. Put it in your own words and get it across. Interpret the song, oh great musician. Don't just do a cover.